Hi, I'm Mary Reese from NJPSA and FEA, and today we're going to speak with one of our amazing keynote presenters who spoke with us at the fall conference of NJPSA, FEA, and ASCD. With me today is Dr. Jeff Hancock from Stanford University, and we're going to talk with him about AI and trust and some other responsibilities that we as leaders have. So let me start off by welcoming you and thanking you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Mary. It's a pleasure to be here, and I've really enjoyed my time with the conference.
I don't think we could have chosen a better person.
Oh, that's so sweet.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
So you mentioned that learning takes place at the speed of trust. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, so this is an old Stephen Covey quote, the guy that did the 7 Habits of Effective People. And what he was really getting at there is the speed of trust is one where when you have trust in place, learning can happen quickly and at low cost. And when trust goes away, it slows down and becomes more costly. So when we have trust in place in the classroom with some kind of technology, for example, you can make that learning really accelerate. And so I think there's an inflection point here around learning where AI is here. And in some places, in some contexts, some classrooms, there's a lot of fear about it. We talked to some of the attendees about the fear that they had. And that slows learning down because I think our students are going to need to know how to use these tools. And so others are building environments of trust where, they're giving instructions on how to think about the AI, trying to understand with the group, when is it appropriate, when is it not, what's ethical. And there you're building trust. And so you'll just see those kids learning so much faster, those adults and teachers as well. We're all in it together. And so I think that's really the core of it. Trust, again, as Stephen Covey said, changes everything. And here, I think there's a real chance to build trust, whereas a lot of people still have fear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that was acknowledged, as you said today.
A number of the attendees, I was shocked at that one story today where she went to our workshop in the morning, and since then, which is just hours, had already started using AI for the first time, was really treating it like, that agency that we talked about. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, that was just delightful. I was so happy to hear that.
Along these lines, though, we talked about the primary mindsets of AI at work. And as you mentioned, educators, for the most part, are familiar with the concept of mindset. So applying it to AI was something that was new for us. So can you tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to give credit to my PhD student who first thought of this. Her name's Angela Lee. She's in her 5th year at Stanford and is really thinks a lot about beliefs. And so when we were first looking at AI and how people think about it, she was the one that was like, oh, I see like a mindset emerging here. And she was the one that helped us identify that sort of pilot mindset where people seemed like they were using it as a tool, they felt excited, and the passenger mindset where they really felt like they had no control. It was being forced on them. It was there to replace them or parts of their jobs, and they weren't optimistic. And then Angela also developed a scale, a measurement tool to kind of get at that. So anybody that's interested, happy to connect them with her and get them that scale. But Angela's really brilliant. And once we saw it, it really helped us organize and think about how to help people feel better about their use.
So you talked about the difference between pilots and passengers.
Right.
And ideally, we would hope that all of the members of NJPSA, all leaders in the field, are pilots.
Yeah. I mean, it would be fantastic because if we have pilots at the leadership level, then that should flow down to those that are, on the front lines, the teachers, the principals. And then ultimately what we want is young pilots that know that they're in control, that know how to think about these systems in ways that are safe and try to minimize those risks and sort of push the limits of innovation and creativity and productivity, all the things that feel really possible right now.
I know one of the participants in the workshop just now in the keynote asked about resources. So this makes a lot of sense to me that, as leaders, we should be pilots. but how do we become pilots?
Yeah.
What's the path or
Yeah.
the journey
Yeah.
in order to get there?
Right. Such an important problem. So, um, right now, there are massive amounts of money, and we're talking tens of billions, being poured into these systems so that we can use them for really cheap. And so we're at an unusual point where our use of these large language models is being subsidized by investors. That's kind of cool.
Mm-hmm.
The negative is that these systems are run by corporations that are collecting the data. It's not exactly clear always what happens to that data. Places like OpenAI and other of these sort of closed large language models, they're indicating legally that they're not using it to train their models, but there's still privacy concerns. They have the text, right? There's ways to mitigate that. Right? I use Gmail. I think most of Stanford is run off of Google, and I'm able to send my emails without worrying that Google's going to be reading my email. So there's ways that we can solve this, I think. So those are closed systems. There are smaller open systems, open source. They have a lot of advantages. You can make them local to, say, your school district or organization, but they tend to have fewer guardrails. So there's sometimes more risks, and they tend to be a little bit less powerful. Which a lot of times, if you're using it to help develop, say, scheduling problems, you don't need the massive, multi-trillion-dollar token model. So I think there's some trade-offs. I think we're in a really interesting time, and we should be taking advantage of it if we can.
So going back to my original thought about the resources, is there anything out there that can teach us how to be pilots?
Yeah, I should know the answer to this off the top of my head, but there's a lot of dynamics in this space because we've been developing digital literacy tools for some time, but AI is really new. It's evolving really fast. And so the best way I can think of it is, so first, come visit the Stanford Social Media Labs website. We have resources there. The second is that many of the tools of thinking about literacy are the same as the digital ones we use, right? You can't trust this system to give you the truth, just like you can't use the internet to give you the truth. And that's okay, right? Like, we are the ones that are ultimately have to make decisions about what we think is credible. So understanding sources is really important. Being able to do searches to confirm or disconfirm things that we're told. All those kind of classic literacy techniques are going to be even more important in the age of AI, and they don't really change that much. But in terms of how do you use it most effectively, there's many tutorials out there. Where we focus, and when we talked about the conference, is the idea of the prompt for people, not the prompt for the system. And so prompting people to think of themselves as the agents that have control, and that these things are the tools that are there to help them in this sort of new creative way.
So, as you pointed out, it really is a change in mindset.
It really is.
In order to become the leader as pilot.
That's right. And, Angela is just so right. And I love how it resonates here in the education leadership space so well. I didn't have to explain what a mindset is, why they're important, and how they matter downstream for behavior. And that they're especially important for people on the margins, people that are struggling, people of diverse backgrounds. Those mindsets really can matter. And so it was a pleasure being here and just be able to talk about it without having to define it too much. But yeah, I think changing our mindset then leads us to behave with these systems differently.
You mentioned in your talk about a person with autism.
They did.
Have you seen any applications of this work related to people with disabilities, as well as the benefits for multilingual learners that we would have in class?
Right. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of work coming out over the last year that are really emphasizing the power of personalization. Personalization has a little bit of a bad word in general tech because it's about personalizing ads or whatever. But here I think of it as pedagogy, personalization, right? So we know that most people don't learn the exact same. Some fortunate few are, all the ways that we teach are aimed at them, right? I'm very fortunate. I learn in a fairly standard way. But now we have this opportunity to create with the same content, different ways to learn it. And so I shared in the conference that one of my PhD students is taking one of my courses and trying to allow it to be a stub that then can be used by different people who can modify it to fit their learning style. That could be neurodiverse. It could be that they're coming from computer science and they don't know how to talk about all this psychological stuff and why is there so much writing. They want it in equation form. Or I'm coming from the humanities, like I don't talk to me about large language models. Like, what is this? And so I'm really excited about the potential for it to translate across languages, to translate across backgrounds, to translate up and down education levels. And I think these systems are going to be really, really good at it.
As educators, we talk about the importance of differentiating for each of our students in class, depending upon what their needs may be, whether they're at one end of the spectrum or the other, or right in the middle. So it just fascinates me with the thought that we could take a standardized lesson and feed into AI the characteristics of different students in the class and how best to present this information to them.
Yeah, I mean, the potential here is endless. And we know that good teachers already do this to some degree, right? They're going to treat this kid differently and that kid differently, and this bunch may be the same. And this is just going to augment, I think, teachers' abilities to do that. Teacher, in many ways, trying to help somebody get from here to there. And there's some journey, there's a bunch of effort that's required to do that. And the AI doesn't take away that effort. What it should be able to do is allow more pathways to get there, right? And I think that teachers that are able to sort of like figure that out will be really, really great at augmenting and supporting their students' journeys to that place. And I think that's the other key thing. It's a lot of people are like, oh, I can save all this work or whatever. And it's true, they can do a lot of work, but it's not how learning works, right? The ones that use it as pilots, or they're really coming to use it as a collaborator, they're still putting in lots of effort. It's just like really different kind of effort that maybe gets you further, faster. And I think that's exciting.
Because as you pointed out, teachers differentiate anyway, but this is just an assist for them to do it perhaps even better or more specifically, depending upon those needs.
Yeah, totally.
So that's wonderful modeling on the part of a teacher as pilot for the students in the class.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Like when I write letters of reference, I don't write the same one to everybody because like if you're at this school, you might want to know X, and if you're at that one, Y. Well, if I'm writing 20 kids letters of reference and I'm modifying each of them, that's a lot of effort. It's important effort, but man, it's a lot. Whereas if I'm able to use an AI that'll help me convey to that particular audience why this student is so great, fantastic, right? That's a win-win for everybody.
And you mentioned also in the keynote about the notion of acknowledging that.
Yeah, right.
Is this something like that? Is this part of the responsibility that we have by using AI?
Right. So this is a really good question. And initially, like if you'd asked me this a year ago, I'd be like, yes, disclose all the time. And now I think it's a little more subtle. Ultimately, what we care about in some situations is, what are you saying to me? Right? Like, are you saying, take this kid, he's amazing? Or here's my grant proposal. What matters there most is like the idea, the communication. And I think what matters a little bit less is like, how was it generated? I didn't ask you if you wrote it by pen first and then used a typewriter and then put it into a computer, right? Like, that said, these systems are doing writing, right? They're composing for us. It is fundamentally different than a typewriter than it is from a computer. So I think it depends a little bit on the context. We're still working this out. When should we be disclosing and how? And so for me, it's ultimately that goal, and it's going to be the context. So my students in my class, in my grad class, decided they would write into my syllabus that they should use AI where appropriate, and I was definitely encouraging of that, and that they should identify its role. And we came up with the way that scientists are now doing it, which is you indicate conception, conceptualization, data collection, analysis, and writing. So those are four roles that take place in any paper in my class, and they had to indicate, what role did AI and they play each one of those. And we gave them structure. It became the norm. It made sense in the context, and everybody knows that's happening. So this is where disclosure works really well. Where it doesn't is, I'm emailing Mary a letter of reference about a student of mine. I think Mary should take him, and I indicate in the letter that I used AI for that. So Mary gets it. It's the first time she's seen that. Now it's like, oh, I'm going to look at this letter like, where, how? Well, now we've kind of been distracted from the whole goal, right? The goal was to get you a letter that represented my true beliefs about this person that I thought would make sense to you. So this is where I struggle a little bit, where I think like unexpected disclosure causes us to focus on the wrong thing. It'd be like if I was listening to you but paying attention how many times you started a word that began with T, the letter T. I'd be listening really carefully, but not at the right level. And so that's why it's a little bit complicated for me. But the more we can talk about, okay, here's what the expectations are in this setting, I think the better we're going to be. And I think the classroom is a perfect place to start. Because in this class, and in this class, not that class or that class, this class, here's how we're going to develop the expectations for disclosing AI.
Because there really are no standards. So if you're dealing with someone who isn't on your same level, and you happen to say, oh, by the way, I used AI to generate this, you don't know what that person will be, how accepting the person will be,
yep,
questioning,
yep,
or dismissive.
Right, exactly. Or if you're ESL and you use it, you're like, oh, I bet you they can't speak so good. So, or if you're coming from a diverse background, right, you're going to get penalized more than say like a white male that's doing it. So we also need to think about like how those kind of biases that are in us, not necessarily the AI, are then going to be used in how I make inferences about you and the fact that you used AI. So I think there's, it sucks because I really wish I could say just disclose all the time. But I've come to believe that what's more important is the expectation within the communication. It'd be nice if we got to a point where when we communicate with AI, like one idea we had was an accent. So I'm Canadian. Most people can still pick up a little bit of my accent. A little O, yeah, the old elongated diphthong. But it's not causing you to not listen to what I'm saying, right? I can recognize that, you have an accent, but I can still listen to you. So there's some ways to think about that. Watermarking, none of them are perfect. I think what it really comes down to is us deciding what is normative for our environment. And those take a while. Like when elevators first happened, like you can imagine here, you get into an elevator, people just didn't know where to look or stand. So they'd face the wall, right? Or they'd face each other and be really awkward. Now we just walk in, turn around 180 and face the doors and everybody's okay. But that didn't happen immediately. We had to sort of decide what it's here. And this is obviously a much bigger question, but I think we can do it.
In terms of the standardization that you just talked about, down the road, maybe, watermark, et cetera, what are the political implications right now? What are you seeing?
Yeah, right. So, misinformation, biggest concern there is flooding the zone. Definitely seeing AI generated content, certainly around the Russian invasion of Ukraine, documented that. There's certainly state actors using that. And ideally, we'll be able to help people distinguish it not by like, is this written by AI or not, but like, where is this coming from, right? And, I kind of feel like journalism is about to have a huge rebound because now I don't care what Starboy362 wrote because that could be AI. But, this was produced by, what's a good New Jersey newspaper? I don't know New Jersey well, but like,
Jersey.com.
Yeah, exactly. Or something from my local community or a journalist I know and subscribe to, right? So there's going to be power in that. And if you just pump out a bunch of fake stuff, but the citizenry is trained to be like, well, I need to know the source, then we can solve this. There's the deep fake question. So far, thankfully, the concern about deepfakes is worse than the deepfakes themselves. It's called the liar's dividend. You just say, oh, nothing you see is real. That video of me is faked. That causes me to doubt my belief in real things. And that's the real concern I have right now. deep fakes, most people can detect something is weird, but at some point fairly soon it'll be the same. And so I think we do need regulation. Um, I am in favor of that, especially around things like elections, where you can fairly like tighten the space where that kind of technique is not allowed. Because I think deepfakes have been used in movies for decades, literally. But when we go into a theater, we understand, we have expectations. Okay, this is not real, and so the degree to which we can protect things like elections, say like a month before an election, deepfakes around politicians are off limits and illegal. And so we're, here in the U.S. have to balance that with freedom of speech, but I think there's a balance to be struck there. And certainly, right now the fear is worse than the actual deep fake technology. But at some point, deep fakes will become sufficiently good to fool us.
Because you said that we might pick up cues that that's the case.
Yeah.
But we are like this.
Yeah.
And how can we say that, people who come from your world
Right.
can pick up?
Yeah.
Most of, our population.
Yeah, exactly. Won't.
So, I mean,
yeah.
what does that say to our society in terms of trust and believability just from the beginning of our conversation?
Totally. Yeah. And right now, the fears about misinformation are so high that we're essentially telling people don't trust anything, which means don't trust credible news. That's a real problem. I think democracy dies not because of misinformation, but fear about it. And, that sort of core training, is very human. So human resilience is like, all right, do you know how to look up a source? Like, I might be a fan of Fox News and I might be a fan of, say, MSNBC. They're going to have very different takes. That's okay. But I also know that Fox News is a professional news organization that has, accountability. They have training. Same with MSNBC. Again, they're going to differ, but I know that those are sources that are being held accountable versus Starboy 362. It's like, why? And part of it is old. We care because we evolved psychologically to care what other people say and do and think. Somebody says something about me, it's going to rile me up if it's negative, right? But we just need to train ourselves to dismiss. It's not important. Dismiss or take action against somebody if you're being attacked, right? This is a huge problem. Ignoring doesn't always work if it's a systematic attack. And so we need to teach people about some of these new playbooks as well. But yeah, I think it's going to come back to, on the one hand, the media ecosystem and the technologies and platforms involved. They need to play their role and be held accountable if they fail. And then we as people need to develop our skill sets, and we can't just rely on, other people to protect us all the time.
Well, that's another role for those of us who are in leadership positions. The other thing I wanted to talk about was cognitive hacks.
Yeah.
Intriguing concept. Tell us more.
Right. Yeah. So some of our work showed that we could train a new AI model to understand what people thought was human-like writing. And when we did that, we showed that this system could produce more human than human writing. What I mean there is that if we took that machine and we asked you to write a profile by yourself, and we asked the machine to write a profile, people would think that the machine's writing was more human. How? Well, we know what people think is human, even though we don't know. And we can train the machine to pick up on those things and then produce it. So we ended up publishing that despite some of the dangers, because we wanted to make people aware of that and try to think of defenses for it. It is a reminder that there are risks here, and that I think responsible use of AI will be about regulation, but also about training people to be aware of these risks and defend themselves.
You've so often mentioned training. I mean, and it just brings it back home. This is our responsibility. As leaders and educators, I mean, we have to start with the students in our care. Right.
And there's one thing I always try to be careful of, which is responsibilization. Sort of pushing the problem onto the teachers, for example, or onto parents. And I think it is important that we recognize as a whole society challenge and opportunity. We need the regulators involved. We need the platforms to be accountable and these new technologies. But I'm a psychologist, and so I think about people, and we can't just not think about our people. And I think one reason I was so excited to come here and was really honored by the invitation was to be able to talk to leaders in education who will be working with the kids, because that's the sort of evergreen solution, right?
Exactly.
And I'm biased as an educator myself, but there's no like solution. It's reps, and education is the place to get those reps.
Yeah, most definitely. So, just a final thought. You mentioned you're a goalie.
Yes,
Which is wonderful. How do you see AI getting involved with athletics?
Yeah. Oh, that's so great. Well, we're already seeing it in sort of statistical classification. Like if you go to the U.S. Open, right, the ump still makes the call, but you can challenge it, and there it is. Boom! Within milliseconds, the system knows whether it was out or not. So we're starting to see that from a judgment point of view. There's new ways in which AI is being used to analyze. So in general, we talked about this at the conference. It's really good to understand human behavior. So now we're starting to see analytics go beyond statistics and say, okay, like in this situation, how is Jeff Hancock most likely to move? Right? If he thinks that there might be a pass from the left to the right, what is he going to do? And so I think we're starting to see this sort of prediction of how athletes will behave and what they'll do. And it's all probabilistic. We still have free will, but that can be a huge advantage, right? If you know they're going to most likely to go like this under those circumstances, well, then that's when you shoot here. Right? So yeah, I think there's lots of things that I hadn't really thought about it a ton, but we're definitely starting to see it move beyond that money ball thing of just statistically this is what's most likely to happen to now like here's a behavior pattern that's most likely to happen.
You mentioned like the concept of a simulation.
Yeah, right.
But then what about helping Jeff be a better player?
Yeah. Well, my colleague Jeremy Bailson co-founded a company called Striver, and it's a VR company. And it's this idea where, I'm a goalie, so I go into VR and I see these players coming in on me and I get reps. And they found it really useful for backup quarterbacks who, it's really intense when you've got all these big guys coming at you. But if you're a backup quarterback, you just don't get it, right? So in VR, you can do that. Well, over the last year, he and I have been talking a lot because he's asking a lot about, okay, well, what about AI? Because now they can use AI to create scenarios that are basically training scenarios. And so marrying the AI creative ability with the VR capability of putting you into that environment is really cool. So his company, I think, is doing fantastic work in that simulation space. It's exciting.
So exciting.
It's exciting.
You must love your job.
I sure do. I love it. And it's fun to be in a space where there's so much change and attention, but also the students are really excited. This is their life, and it's great to be working in this space. I love it.
Yeah, to be surrounded by so many creative people.
Right, exactly. And seeing how they're doing things, how they're trying to mitigate risk, and then try to bring that out to people like that person we talked to today who was just really afraid and now feels like they have a little bit more control. It's exciting. Yeah.
Well, we thank Jeff very much for being with us. It was a phenomenal opportunity to hear his good thinking and inspired us to understand that as leaders and pilots, we have a big responsibility, and let's just make sure we take advantage of it. Continue to learn ourselves.
Yeah, I agreed. I'm trying to do it myself. So thank you, Mary. Really appreciate it.
It's been great.